You know all the issues plaguing the Packers' run defense, the soft shell coverages and the line of scrimmage problems and the tackling problems and the attitude and the philosophy of it all? Yeah. Well, take all that stuff, make it even worse, and you've got the LA Chargers. This week, the Green Bay Packers have an opportunity to put together an attitude game, a trenches game, like the other LA team that they played a couple weeks ago. This is California versus Wisconsin. If you want to go real culture wars about it, it is time to show that Midwest toughness. Plus, Lily Zhao joins us from Fox 6 in Milwaukee for another edition of Zhao You Doing, all of that on today's show.
You are Locked On Packers, your daily Green Bay Packers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You were Locked On Packers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Peter Bukowski, and I cover the Packers for The Leap, a newsletter I would love for you to subscribe to. Follow me on Twitter, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on Twitter, Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook, subscribe to the podcast, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you find podcasts, you will find Locked On Packers, the #1 Packers podcast on the internet, and the show for fans who know what happened. They want to know why and how. Lily Zhao on the show today. We're going to talk about a tough loss to the Steelers, but an emerging group of offensive skill talent, what's going on with the defense. We're going to get to all of that coming up here in just a little bit on Locked On Packers. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at LinkedIn Jobs. They help you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. This week, the Green Bay Packers have an opportunity to lay their toughness on the line, to stamp a game with their physicality. All of the issues that we see with the Green Bay Packers defense, the run defense in particular, can't get off blocks, can't stay in their gaps, can't hold the point of attack, don't tackle well, a ton of too high safety looks. That's how the Chargers play. And they're worse at it. They're worse at it than Green Bay. I know that's hard to believe, but they are. The Lions punked them out offensively, like even worse than they did to Green Bay, which makes sense because the Chargers, by pick a metric, are worse. Adjusted line yards, DVOA, EPA per play, whatever you want to pick. This defense is worse than Green Bay. Now, the offense is better. Justin Herbert is a star, even without Mike Williams. And if Keenan Allen, he's always seemingly a game time decision. Fantasy football players know that. Anyone that's ever had Keenan Allen in fantasy is always like, okay, it's Sunday morning at 11 o'clock. I got to check to see if he's actually going to play this week, even though he didn't practice all week. This team is not a tough team. They're not. And they're frankly not a good team. And that doesn't mean that the Packers should beat them. Everydayers will know I don't love that word anyway. Should. But they're not a good team. They're not as good as their talent says that they should be, frankly. I don't have a lot of good answers as to why that is. But I do know, defensively, they are, much like the Packers, soft. That's just what they are. You cannot watch the tape of them against Detroit and come away with any other conclusion. Now, the Lions offense is magnificently schemed. They executed at a really high level. Their offensive line is playing better than Green Bay's offensive line, especially in the run game, but in pass protection as well. Inconsistencies with pass protection has been a problem for this offense over the last 6 weeks. But this Packers team, we saw them a couple weeks ago. They put it to the Rams in the trenches. They said, we're tougher than you. We're more physical than you. We're going to execute better than you, and you don't have the players to do anything about it. And more importantly, maybe, as we're seeing at times, you don't have the game plan. You don't have the coaching to stop it. Matt LaFleur coached a superlative game against the Rams. And then I thought coached a very good, at least from an offensive game planning point of view, game against the Pittsburgh Steelers. I don't know how he's going to watch this Chargers team and come away with any conclusion other than it's time to just drop them on the table. This is the game. Now, there have been other games. Certainly, the Rams game was another one. And you know, look, the Raiders game, the Broncos games, like they've had other opportunities to do this and haven't because they have not been able to execute. One thing we're going to talk about with Lily is this idea of could they have done more previously? Whereas now we're seeing them do a little bit more, some of the different creative looks that we're seeing, especially in the run game. Why wasn't that always part of the plan? Aaron Jones probably part of that. The rookies, a big part of that to be sure. But they had to mix up their approach this week. The Steelers, it was, no, actually, you can throw on them. You didn't have to play as balanced. Whereas the Rams, you knew you could run on them. Well, you can run on this team. This is Aaron Jones, full send. This is A.J. Dillon, full send. And then this is play action, full send. You're not going to have to do the thing you did against Pittsburgh where you're going to have to get in the gun and try and get them in nickel and try and throw it on them. You don't have to do that. Now you can, because they're not a great passing defense either. It's just a bad defense. But when you can attack a team, and isn't this such a great lesson for the Packers organization? And maybe even for me, as someone who's like, run defense doesn't matter as much as passing defense. I still believe that. But isn't it a great lesson that it seems so much easier to attack a defense that is soft in run defense when you know anytime I want to get 5 yards offensively, I have a play I know I can get to. Let me pick one of 18 runs that I like. The Lions in their own territory ran a trap on 4th and 6. Knew it would work, and it did. Like it's 4th and medium to longish. Like 4th and 6 is a real down and distance. You got to call a real play. They called a run on 4th and 6. If that is not just snatching your manhood, that is an emasculation. That is, I mean, come on. Have some pride. You give up a 4th and 6 on a junior varsity day one install run. I can't imagine it because it's something the Packers would do. There is an opportunity here to provide catharsis for a fan base, Matt LaFleur, and say, look at all of this that's been happening to the Packers. The Packers can do it to someone else. Will they? I guess we'll see. We're going to talk to our pal Lily Zhao here for a Zhao You Doing coming up in just a second on Locked On Packers. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have the access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. The Packers might be facing Justin Herbert without Jair Alexander. That DC job might be on LinkedIn sooner than later. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on the candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering qualified hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. And today's Locked On Packers also brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Score this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 back in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. You're going to get plus odds with the Packers this week on that money line. This could be the week. And if you hit it, $150 back. That'd be nice. In addition to the win, that would be nice. Or you could go the emotional hedge route, pick the Chargers, and if you lose your money line bet, it's because the Packers won. I'm not saying I haven't done it. The app is easy to use, a wide range of betting options, spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/LockedOnNFL and get the NFL season done right. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. And thanks to everyone who makes Locked On Packers their first listen every day. We hope you like starting your day with us as much as we like starting our day with you. Football season is here, and Locked On is kicking up our coverage with Locked On NFL Kickoff Live. Each Friday, Locked On will go live at 2 p.m. Eastern on every Locked On NFL YouTube channel. Hosts Anitra Batiste, Jarvis Davis, and Kyle Krabs will break down every game on the NFL slate to get you ready for your team's matchups, your fantasy lineups, your betting angles, and more. Plus, get the in-depth local analysis from our stable of NFL hosts across the country who know these teams better than anyone else. Find Locked On NFL Kickoff Live every Friday at 2 p.m. East on any Locked On NFL YouTube channel. Joining me now from Fox 6 in Milwaukee to talk about not a win, but a positive step, at least for the offense. We will certainly talk about some of the ugliness on defense as well. And how big is big enough? Yes, we're going to talk about that. Lily Zhao, you doing?
Peter, I'm doing well. We're kind of acclimating to, some different sporting things happening here in Milwaukee. So I'm keeping busy, and the Packers are one of those. So I'm doing well. Busy week, but excited for Turkey Day next week. Is that how you doing?
In a lot of ways, the Packers are kind of taking a back seat right now because the Bucs are trying to figure out what's going on with them early in the season. You've got the Brewers, Craig Counsell, going full Benedict Arnold. Amazing stuff there. Just wild times right now in Wisconsin sports. I would expect nothing less. Let's talk about some wild times because Jordan Love, the last couple of weeks, if you believe Pro Football Focus, has been one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. They can't even get to 20 points, and yet it seems like this offense is making progress. How do you make sense of that?
That's a great question. I do feel like you kind of have to.
That's the correct answer, by the way.
Right?
I don't know. I don't know. It's a weird thing.
It's like you have to watch them play because I feel like if you're looking solely just based on statistics, you would say, he's not really having a good year. But if you're watching the game and you're watching him play, you're thinking he made a really big step, in my opinion, against the Steelers, and he was on the road. He was in some big situations and made some really big throws. And I think overall he's certainly improved the last couple of weeks, but I just don't think that the stat line, if you're just looking straight on paper, it's a little deceiving as to how much progress he has made. Lily
is saying, watch the tape, nerds.
Watch the football.
Watch the games, please. The improvement in Love's play also dovetails with the rookies. The rookie pass catchers have come through in a big way the last few weeks. How much chicken and the egg can we do here? Like, how much of the rookies playing better? Is Jordan Love playing better? How much of it? Because the answer is it's both, right? But like, are you able to even parse who deserves the lion's share of the credit? Does it matter?
I would say maybe just the receivers making those catches. I think Jordan's put up some good balls this year. They've been dropped multiple times. And again, there were some drops in that game against Pittsburgh, but I think maybe just the receivers, if you want to put the chicken before the egg kind of thing, maybe just them making those catches, you can kind of say, it adds a completion check in the stat line, but also I think also just builds confidence for Jordan knowing I'm making those throws and they're being completed, which is another check in the box of growth for a young offense. So I think maybe just those guys making the right catches, being in the right spots, knowing their routes, that has improved. And thus Jordan Love looks better because his receivers are catching footballs. But I also will say it's another portion of Jordan also stepping up as well and making the better throws. And that also was really nice to see. I mean, that touchdown pass to Jayden Reed was a beauty, the 35-yarder.
Awesome.
That was great.
And I think, as I mentioned, it is both, right? But it also builds on itself. You make a good throw and you get someone to bail you out. Or you make a good throw, and someone drops it. That's kind of disheartening. Like, it's tough to build on that. Or but if you make a bad throw and they bail you out, that gives you the confidence to just go and make the next throw, knowing like, okay, it doesn't have to be perfect. And I think that can let Jordan Love play a little freer. And it also gives these guys a little bit more confidence to keep playing here. The addition of Aaron Jones to this offense. Now, I understand he did not have his best game on Sunday, but it just seems like having him as a safety release valve makes things easier for everyone else. I do wonder, we talked about this, Lily, how many more games they would have won if Aaron Jones had been there. But given the way that they looked on Sunday, and I think if you go back to the Rams game too, letting Jordan Love cook down the field a little bit more, does it change the way you view some of those hyper conservative game plans that we saw in the middle of the season? I'm trying to ask this in a non-leading way, but I'm failing. But like, do you look at that differently now, given what we've seen at this moment?
I do a little bit, right? I do believe that having Aaron Jones, like you mentioned, didn't have his best game, but even just his mere presence on the field, I think adds another dimension. Then you have AJ Dillon running so well. I thought he had perhaps his best game of the year.
Great.
You have those
an explosive run by AJ Dillon.
40 yards. Yeah. When you have those guys playing well, albeit the red zone issues, that really certainly does open things up. And I think just, when you're saying letting guys cook and they're able to cook, and Jordan was able to take, advantage of the middle of the field, his younger receivers were making the catches. I think it all kind of, like you mentioned, just builds upon one another. But I think, again, Aaron Jones, just his presence on the field, I think elevates things. So I think if you hadn't played, if you still injured, maybe we would not have seen the product on Sunday. Maybe they would have been more conservative in that regard, saying we can't really challenge the defense, so we'll just kind of keep everything between the sticks and hope that these guys can convert a third down the hard way, or a first down the hard way. But I just think having him, you can have those explosive plays, and I think that's what they did on Sunday.
Yeah, it's like, even if he's not making the plays and he missed some opportunities in this one, just his mere presence, what he can do affects the gravity of everything around them. I asked the question because I have been a little bit critical of some of the conservative play calling. And I do wonder, like, do you think if they had said, okay, no Aaron Jones, I get it, we don't know what these rookies are doing, they can't even run simple concepts in this offense, could they have managed the game plans from the last 2 weeks against Vegas, against Denver, in some of these games where they looked more conservative? I don't know the answer to that, but like, doesn't it make you want to ask those questions, those hypotheticals? Because it's like, this version of the offense looks pretty good.
It does. And you have to wonder, had they kind of let them loose in those games,
just let them make mistakes.
Right. But potentially, would there have been bigger strides now? Because you would have given them that chance a month ago to say, let's air it out. Let's see if you guys can make those catches. Let's see if you guys can make plays in those clutch situations. And maybe that benefits them a little bit more now than where they currently are. But I will say this, though, at least they're doing it now, right? Like, if they're not still conservative, they're letting it rip. We're seeing kind of what this offense, the potential it can be, next year, maybe when guys are more comfortable. But at least we're in it now, Peter. So that's a positive.
Yes. They get a cookie for doing the thing that they always should have done. I'm half joking because I don't know the answer. I really genuinely don't know if the coaching staff was right or not to feel like, man, I don't even know what plays we can call, because they can't even run stick, like day one install stuff. And so how are we going to do the jet motion and the orbit motion and these trick plays? Like, how are we going to do that stuff? I totally am sympathetic to that. I don't have a good answer. It just makes me wonder, Lily. It just makes me wonder. Let's talk about this 2022 rookie class from a year ago. So the sophomores now, because Christian Watson took a lot of heat this week. What have you thought of? Let's just start with him. What have you thought of his play so far this season? Certainly not to the level any of us expected it to be, but is there something you can point to and say, okay, this is the problem with the offense or with him?
I think it might just be the fact that they know Christian can create separation. He can get down the field. And if he's quote unquote the only guy who really can do that, I know Luke has that ability in the middle of the field, but it's kind of hard for him to get some yards after the catch, right? I think because they believe that Christian might be the only guy who can create those big explosive plays, they're kind of force feeding him in that aspect. And I think when defenses know that, it's an easy guy to key in on and say, I mean, we know they're going to feed it to Watson. We're going to get in front of it. We're going to make a play, etc. You had Patrick Peterson, a veteran. He made a great play on the ball that got tipped and picked. And then, of course, that last interception, everyone kind of knew what they were going to do. So stack the goal line and he got picked. So that being said, I think maybe they are force feeding that play because they believe he might be the only option. But that being said, I still do believe that there is confidence in Christian, in himself, that he needs to fight for those balls. He needs to be in better position, maybe to come back or to extend or whatnot, just to make a play on the ball and not just kind of sit back and wait for the ball to come to him, right? I think, again, that's still the growth of a young receiver. I think the heat he caught just with his family and everything online is so unwarranted. Again, they're playing a game of football. It's not the end of the world. But I do think when Jordan Love's 10 interceptions half come when they're targeting Christian Watson, that kind of says a lot. And I think that for the staff, they kind of have to go back and reevaluate what has been the issue with, Jordan Love to Christian Watson, and why hasn't that been working in a deep ball situation. So I think he can get better. I think they're confident in him, but I think until we see kind of a change in how Christian attacks collecting deep balls, see if that'll change at all.
All right, back more with our friend Lily Zhao here on Locked On Packers in just a second. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in America, and it's not hard to understand why. You can win up to 25 times your money by putting together a lineup. It could not be easier. Grab a couple players, Prize Picks sets their statistical projections, and you decide if you think they're going to create more or less than whatever it is. Jordan Love, passing yards. Aaron Jones, rushing and receiving touchdowns. Put a couple guys together, you've got a lineup, and you can win up to 25 times your money. They even offer a reboot policy so that your entry stays in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second half, that player is rebooted. PrizePicks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. Incredible. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use the code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Thanks to everyone who makes Locked On Packers your first listen every day. Every dayers tomorrow on the show are crossover Thursday. And this is very cool. The Locked On Podcast Network now has a 24/7 live streaming YouTube feed. So, can't find anything on the streamers to watch? Go Locked On Sports Today. Locked On Sports Today is the YouTube channel. It's also the show that I host on the Locked On Podcast Network. But if you go to the YouTube page, you will always find a Locked On show playing there. So, get some insight from around the Locked On Podcast Network. Go subscribe to Locked On Sports Today to stay locked on everything. That is such a great point that I honestly hadn't considered, and I probably should have, frankly, that they don't, this is a little bit like what happened with Marquez Valdes-Scantling and the Packers offense in the late Aaron Rodgers era. Was like, they only had one guy to do that specific thing. And so they really can only, if they're going to run like a deep clear out, an influence post, they kind of have to use Christian Watson. He's the only guy that's scaring anybody vertically right now. I kind of think they could use Romeo Doubs, but they don't seem to think that they can. I don't think that they're calling an offense because they think he can only do those things. I think you're right to say, no, it's the opposite. He's the only one who can do those things. And so they're only having him do those things. That is a highly astute point, again, that I'm like, my mind is worrying because I'm like, how did I not think of that as the answer here? They're using, I think, though, also, and I want to talk about him, Jayden Reed. He's doing some of the things that last year they did Christian Watson in the slot as a vertical player. They're using Jayden Reed to do that. And so Watson like lost a little bit of his target share to those kinds of things. What is your impression of Jayden Reed, Ben, so far this season?
I think he's played well. I know he'll be the first to admit again, he had drops this year, comes to the territory, et cetera, et cetera. But that being said, I just think if this is your rookie season in the NFL and you are, in a handful of guys that your quarterback trusts and you're a rookie receiver, that's impressive. And I think he's made so many darn good plays, so many really good catches. You talk about touchdown catches that he makes. You talk about his contribution on special teams. You talk about just his ability to get out in space. I think he's done phenomenal. So I think he really will be that X factor for this team moving forward. I think he's getting better. Dontavian Wicks, I think, is improving himself as well. I think the coaches were complimentary of those guys. And then you have Romeo Doubs, who's been steady, but he really hasn't gotten a lot of targets lately. And you have these guys that are just stepping up. But I think Jayden, Dontavian, those guys are playing their butts off. I think they're playing really well.
Certainly exceeded my expectations. Jayden Reed was not a receiver who in the draft I loved, and he has been phenomenal. Wes Hodkiewicz had the stat that the only guy with more 30-yard catches this season than Jayden Reed is Tyreek Hill. That is not something I had
impressive
on my bingo card so
I'm stealing
far.
That stat.
It's a great stat. I love it. One more guy from the 2022 class I want to talk to you about. Devontae Wyatt. Is it too early to just call this?
In my heart of hearts, I'm going to say yeah. It's interesting you brought him up because I hadn't really thought of him in a couple of weeks, and that might be for good reason.
It's not great. It's not great, Lily.
Yeah, it's not great. And I think his raw talent is there. I just think that, if you're, on the field and you're not making plays, you're not getting on the field, it's tough. It's tough, but it's hard for me to call it right now. But I will say maybe by the end of the season, if there really isn't a market improvement, there are other guys that can take that spot for sure.
So Matt LaFleur got fired up. Speaking of the defense and its size, all jokes aside, he was talking about the size. And this idea that the defensive ends, outside linebackers are really defensive ends. So this idea of down, it's like on Twitter, you know how on Twitter, you don't engage on Twitter the way that I do. So maybe you don't. That once you realize you're getting into an argument over semantics, it's just sort of like, why are we doing this? Like, this is stupid now. That's where I feel like we are with this defense, where it's like, you no longer have any leg to stand on merits. Now we have to argue semantics. And it seems fitting that in the digital world that we live in now, the last thing that Matt LaFleur can argue about with this defense is semantics. What did you think of that whole interaction? I know you saw it, of just the I'm going to defend. Oh no, we're not really playing that small, when we have eyes. Speaking of watch the games, we watch the games, Matt. We can see you guys nodding gaps, playing nickel when there's two tight ends on the field. What did you think of this reaction from Matt LaFleur?
I kind of had a similar reaction. I was like, ooh, we're really getting into the nitty gritty semantics, arguing. I'm like bringing my popcorn. I'm like, oh, this is interesting. I will say, if you're not a big football person, it was a very interesting back and forth to listen to say, maybe I can pick up some football knowledge. But that being said, I do think that when you're watching on the field, you can have your own interpretation of what coach said. But I think, to your point there, when there really is no answer, you kind of have to look elsewhere for not deflection, but just another reasoning for why you're doing what you're doing. And I think that might have been what he was conveying, because there really haven't been no answers for them.
Does it make you change the way that you view the future of Joe Barry, though? Because it did make me go, I remember the end of the Mike Patton era. And by the middle of that season, that 2020 season, and I know they started to play better in the second half, but in the middle of that season, when things were not going great, Matt LaFleur was openly criticizing Mike Patton. Now, Mike Patton was not his guy, but it made me go, are we going to have to do this all over again next year? Because this is a pretty forceful defense of a defensive coordinator that everyone else seems to think is just not it.
Yeah, I do think that maybe the writing is on the walls, and at the end of the year, we'll see a change at that, position. But I do feel like, and it's interesting though, because LaFleur has said this. He's like, it's crazy to do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result, right? I mean, hasn't been much changing on the defensive end. And if you're still talking 9 games into the year about we still can't execute, we're missing assignments, we're missing the gaps, we're missing tackles, it's like, what else can you do? I mean, at this point, it's throw everything out the window and start over again because it's not working. And to expect the defense to suddenly flip a switch and be like, we're going to be this phenomenal run defending team, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen, especially if you're going to keep the same scheme and you're going to keep the same personnel. I mean, I don't know what you're going to do week 17 that was different from now that'll get a much different result outside of making some big changes. So there might be the writing on the wall. We'll see. But I know it's definitely not been the year that they wanted to. And I think the last couple of weeks with the offense really being as, up and down as they have been, that's kind of masked, what has happened on the defensive end. That being said, they have still played a lot better than I expected to keep the offense in games. So I can't totally fault them on that side.
The thing is, this weekend, if you want to see a team that can rival Green Bay playing light boxes and playing soft against the run, it is the LA Chargers. Boy, wait till you see these guys. So it is like this does have a chance to be a little bit of a repeat of what we saw with the Lions game. I think there's going to be a lot of points. It's going to be a lot of fun for us to talk about next week, a holiday week. We will get people in and out early so that they don't miss their turkey day. Lily, we'll talk to you then. Thanks.
Sounds good. Thanks, Peter.
All right. Thanks to Lily for joining the show. Always, always, always great to talk to her. Back tomorrow, our Locked On Chargers, Locked On Packers crossover edition. We're going to have some fun. Follow me on Twitter, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on Twitter, Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to the podcast, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts. Wherever you find podcasts, you will find Locked On Packers. And anytime you want to come hang out with us live on our YouTube page, you can do that. Go subscribe to Locked On Packers on YouTube so you can stay Locked On Packers.